Does input really work? Written by Khatzumoto, posted sometime prior to November of 2007. This is another question/comment where the answer grew really long. Here goes. Hey cats, a quick question when you get back from your break. When I started using my SRS, I entered the English sentence in the question field and the Japanese translation in the answer field. But after reading your method on the site, I no longer try to translate. As you say, this is too failure prone. So now I put the Japanese in the answer field and leave out the translation. The only concern I have in doing this is that I'm not actively using my brain to come up with the sentence I want to say. I am just reading a sentence that has already been created. It seems like the easy way out. It's like, for example, asking someone to write a Japanese email for you, and you may understand it perfectly, but you would have learned and retained a lot more if you had gone through the thought process by writing the email yourself. I hope this makes sense. Cheers, Mark. Hey Mark, thanks for your comment. It seems like the easy way out. It does, it really does, and I had the exact same reservations as you. You would have learned and retained a lot more. This is the power of input. Input has a lot going for it. 1. Input actually allows you to learn more, and more correctly, than just output. There is simply a limit to how long of a sentence, and how many sentences, you can actively recall in a single day, but with input, you can learn to read sentences of a much higher number and greater length. Part of why this is important is Japanese has the structural power to create very long, yet very understandable, sentences compared to English. Output would tend to bias your Japanese towards short sentences. When you get into real Japanese, it's nothing like English structurally, and nothing like the textbooks. I fear that outputting would lead a person to remain tied to English structure. There are many, hundreds of ways to say the same thing in Japanese. These ways are not superfluous. They each carry a different nuance. I worry that output-focused practice would force one to either have to create a lot of context for each SRS entry, or learn a limited range of vocabulary/phraseology/usage. 2. There are words you need to be able to understand, but never need to be able to use. Input lets you catch these, where output would lead you to sidestep them. 3. Writing an email is not practicing a language. It is using a language. To paraphrase the folk at Anti-Moon, if output is so much practice, why don't we go practice some Jonka right now? Come on, let's write an email in Jonka. Practice makes perfect. Writing an email is a demonstration of ability, not a creator of ability as such. What, are you going to create the text, format, and conventions of Japanese email out of thin air? Of course not. You need to have read, input them first. There comes the time to draw output. But first you need to look at the subject. And the more accurately, native-like, you wish to draw the subject, the more closely you must look. 4. Input vocabulary/phrasing/structure eventually bubbles its way up into your active vocab. It just does, naturally. Just like when you just watch, a movie over and over again until you talk along with the characters. You never practice speaking with them, it just starts to come out. Insert movie quotes. I watched that famous scene in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth? Who doesn't love that line? And all of Crimson Tide and Independence Day so many times that lines like this are stuck in my head, even though it's been some 10 years since I last saw CT or AFGM. As you use input in conjugation with an SRS, patterns and phrases will start to appear in your active repertoire. You'll start using them, perhaps even without fully knowing where they come from. This is something I'm experiencing with increasing intensity. I'm using more and more new Japanese words and phrases correctly with less and less conscious awareness of where I'm picking them up from. They're just there, as if by instinct. Of course, it's no coincidence that I remain surrounded by Japanese audio, video, and text. If you just keep doing SRS reps without trying to force it, whole phrases, whole patterns will come out by themselves, as wholes and correct. You'll be there one day, taking your clothes out of a washing machine, and realizing that you put bleach on your favorite black cargo pants, you'll go, Nanja Goria! Or your friend will be pasting mayonnaise onto his kosher hot dog like there's no tomorrow, and you'll go, Omae, dondake mayonezu kakeru chunen? All because you've seen and heard these things used in the right context. It's not magic or anything, it's just some kind of neurological process at work. I don't fully know what goes on, I just know it works. It's unconscious, so it's hard to test, so schools don't like it. But it's happening. If you just keep inputting, working diligently but patiently, humans created language before there were governments or schools to regulate it. We just do it naturally. It takes a while to build and develop this instinct, but input is the best way I've come across so far. 5. Input is not all passive. For example, you still have to actively recall kanji reading. 6. Incorrect output, if not corrected, leads to bad habits. Massive input automatically leads to correct output with a very low error rate. Perfect for the person who isn't surrounded by enough people who have the combination of time, compassion, and condescension to correct her at every turn. 7. I found myself more able to retain and produce Japanese as time has gone on. This is due to massive input. So input has helped me not only to output things that I have input, but to build my ability to recall and output new things. I know what words fit where one would be appropriate and another wouldn't, and this is crucial. To use English as an example, it's a building site, not a building place. It's a place where I belong, not a site where I belong. Now, there are some contexts where these examples wouldn't work, but what I'm trying to show is that words that mean almost the exact same thing can still be quite inappropriate to interchange. Massive input will lead you to see these patterns because of the quantities involved. I don't know whether output can or will do that for you. 8. You're of course free to try doing things any way you want. People like doing output-centered work because they get usable vocabulary quicker. This is a valid point. But what about their comprehension? What good will it do for you to ask for directions if you can't understand the response of that old man who speaks in a regional dialect and, in fact, cannot or does not switch to standard speech? As I see it, output-centered practice offers narrow, short-term benefits at considerable expense to the wider and more long-term issue of complete fluency. Reading, listening, writing, speaking. Well, that's just me. Let me suggest that you, and anyone else, give input a chance and not ignore it just because it's counterintuitive and seems too easy. It took me a long time to come around to it, and I was initially more than a little skeptical. It can't be this easy. So much so that even when I started doing input, it was with curiosity. Let's just run this for a while and see how it turns out. Rather than faith. Oh my gosh, this is so gonna work, and a little while from now, I'll start a website about it. I think this skepticism arises at least in part because A. Output, especially speaking, is more dramatic and impressive than input. Anyone can see and hear you speak, but if you just say that you understand something... B. Input generally precedes output in learning. We learn to understand before we learn to use, and therefore it seems like a lower level. Why not just jump straight into the driver's seat and start outputting, right? Answer, because you're going to cause an accident. C. Passive memory, the ability to understand but not produce, is a stage of forgetting a language. It's part of the process of losing proficiency. So again, there's a temptation or tendency to misunderstand it, to look down on it since it's associated with decay and regression rather than progress and improvement. D. Our society, whatever that means, values being proactive. It values being a producer, going out and putting out. A leader, not an observer, not a fence sitter, not a watcher. It doesn't so much value the receptive, analytical, contemplative aspects involved in input. That doesn't mean that people don't spend vast sums of time and money on TV and movies. It just means that these things are not highly valued. Admittedly, this is fuzzy and a huge generalization, but it's just something that hits me. 9. I am just reading a sentence that has already been created. Perfect. This is not a bad thing. In fact, the more, the better. Remember, you need native-like Tanaka Taro Japanese, not Mark Quinn Japanese. The time for Mark Quinn's idiolect will come, but it will come after he knows what he's doing, after he's observed, heard and listened, and internalized Japanese like Japanese. Like the writer who breaks stylistic conventions and rules for effect, first you have to know what the rules are. There's a huge difference between linguistic rule-breaking brought about intentionally and rule-breaking due to ignorance. One is genius, and the other is, well, ignorance. You have no business creating your own Japanese until you see how masters of Japanese, native-level speakers, create theirs. Each email or piece of output is like a dish of food. If you want to make it edible, legible, to Japanese people, you first need ingredients and a recipe. Better yet, taste some, see what it looks like, watch someone make it, etc. And early in your cooking career, you need to stick to the recipe rather than substituting the ingredients. If you hope to make something acceptable to a Japanese person, then you can't just wing it right from the start. That's leaving your success to random chance, and your chances of success in such a situation are slim to none. Get the right ingredients, follow the recipes, and when you can consistently make something good according to a pre-created recipe, then start making your own variations, then start winging it. I'm sure this metaphor falls apart at some point, but hopefully this makes sense where it needs to. Note that the way to learn these rules I'm discussing is not to look up the list of rules of Japanese. Most of the rules I'm talking about are not explicitly written, but they do exist. They are real and tangible. They're hard to express, but people instantly know when they're being broken. In comedy, they're often intentionally bent. 10. So now I just put the Japanese in the answer field and leave out the translation. Yeah, you can have Japanese question field and Japanese answer field, plus, if you're a beginner, an authoritative English translation from the source text. You will, of course, want to move away from English altogether as soon as possible. Sorry for the overlong response. I'm wanting to make the issue clear for whoever else comes to read. Have fun with your studies and feel free to ask any other questions.